I promise you, I do a lot more than just ruin your day by playing devil's advocate and busting nutrition myths. But here we are with another one. I wish going organic was the solution to all our problems. I wish it was more healthy in the same way that I wish it was an amazing option for the environment, the climate, and the world. Honestly, I really do. But I think rather than being a solution, it's much more of a delusion. And that's both for whether you're going organic for your health or you're going organic for the planet. My sincerest apologies, I am going to be that prick that comes in and pisses all over your organic bonfire. But don't panic, it's not all bad. I will be providing a load of solutions, caveats, alternatives, and tips to how you can go about making the best decisions for your health and nutrition and for the world. So it's not all lost, but I do think that the beliefs around organic food, particularly in this context, organic fruit and veg, is borderline delusion, something that I'm going to be calling the organic delusion. And without further ado, let's get into it. Going organic basically involves the removal of man-made chemical pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, anything synthetic generally speaking, including antibiotics and other chemicals. Now, these chemical fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides are undeniably bad for the immediate wildlife surrounding those crops. They're bad for the soil health as well, which has knock-on effects down the line, and they might not be the best option for the environment either. So they clearly have a negative impact on the health of wildlife, and they might also have an impact on human health as well. Although that is up to a lot of debate right now, the research is an absolute mess, quite frankly. Lots of the research on it is biased because it's funded by lots of these companies, which then makes things very controversial and very hard to believe exactly where the research is pointing us. So for now, I won't comment on that. Organic produce also cannot be genetically modified, or GMO. So with that definition out the way, let's get into the first myth surrounding organic food. At face value, completely stopping non-organic food and eating and producing exclusively organic food sounds like a very good idea. But organic doesn't simply mean that we just don't use any pesticides or fertilizers or herbicides. We just use organic alternatives, which are still fairly potent, albeit less potent versions of their synthetic counterparts. And yes, despite being organic, they still consist of highly concentrated chemicals. They're just not synthetic. And further from that, the rigorous safety testing that non-organic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides have to undergo before being mass-produced is much less of a thing when it comes to organic versions. And part of the reason for that is that organic versions are just newer. So there is quite simply just less research and less, more importantly, safety research on them, particularly on the long-term uses, both on the health of the environment and the health of humans. So for those of you that opt to buy organic produce for fear of pesticides or herbicides, maybe it isn't the godsend that it seems to be. And the other myth is that organic produce is healthier or more nutritious, which is very likely not the case, at least not indefinitely. And there is going to be a ton of variation from crop to crop based on their nutritional value. And this is dependent on a variety of factors. You have soil health, you have growing method, you have environment, light intensity, humidity, location in the world. One of the key ones here being growing method. How is that crop actually grown? If you take hydroponics, for example, the process of not using soil, instead just pumping water and nutrient solution to keep the plants well fed. The most common hydroponic crops are things like leafy salad greens, like lettuce and spinach, for example, but you can also do tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and strawberries, and a variety of other fruits and veg as well. It is somewhat likely that hydroponic grown plants might have less nutrition in them than soil grown plants, regardless of whether or not they're organic or non-organic. Plants make their own vitamins, so generally speaking, the vitamin content will be the same regardless of growing method and environment, but they obtain their minerals from water and the soil. So if those minerals aren't present in the growing solution, the hydroponic solution used to feed those plants, then they might have less minerals in them than soil-grown counterparts. But there is no reason why hydroponically grown crops can't have all the nutrition they need. So if you add the correct minerals to the growing solution, then they should theoretically have the exact same mineral content and nutritional value as their organic alternatives. So it massively depends on the how rather than it just being organic or non-organic. The next one would be something like monoculture crops. These are basically large expanses of land where you have one crop repeatedly grown. A typical one would be corn. These are very effective for very high yielding crops, but there is a lot of issues that come about with monoculture. Individual plant species require a unique ratio, let's say, of nutrients from the soil. So if you're growing corn after corn after corn, you're going to be sapping the soil of all of those key nutrients. So that is why farmers use a ton of these chemical fertilizers to replenish the soil every season. But this just leads to unbalanced, shitty soil. And by the way, this is also common for organic cropping. It's not exclusive to non-organic agriculture. Lots of these chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides deplete the soil of beneficial nutrients. Now, of course, this is far worse for non-organic farming, but it is something that is still present in smaller levels in organic farming. So organic farming isn't necessarily the solution for this context. And a huge problem with monocrops is that they're very susceptible to being wiped out by pests or disease, because lots of the time, lots of these pests and diseases are actually crop specific. So, for example, you're growing a massive field of carrots, you might get carrot root fly come in and eviscerate the entire crop. In the same way, you might be growing a massive monocrop of tomatoes, and then tomato blight hits, they all get wrecked. Which is why pesticides, herbicides, and chemical sprays can be so effective in this context. But this creates this vicious cycle of deplete the soil, somewhat replenish it, deplete the soil, somewhat replenish it. This is just a downward spiral of consistently depleting the soil of nutrients and biological life, which is definitely not ideal. So that's a very valid argument for stop using fertilizers, stop using chemical pesticides. But it's likely not as simple as that. Because, of course, there are a ton of massive astronomical benefits to using chemical fertilizers and pesticides. First of all, they've massively increased crop yield by an insane margin. They've played a significant role in quite literally reducing world hunger, so we can't quite ignore that one. So crop yields are bigger, there's less issues with diseases, the list goes on. So it's not so much an issue with the chemicals per se, but more an issue of how we use them and the typical industrial level farming process as a whole, particularly when we consider things like monocropping. This is something that might be able to get solved with things like polyculture or permaculture and other sustainable agriculture practices, but I think I'll save that stuff for another video. Let's quickly jump back to my point about nutrition. The idea that organic food is more nutritious than non-organic food. There are a fair few studies that have found this to be not really the case. Matter of fact, Hugh Richards did a little study on his channel where he looked at the nutrient content of different fruits and veg, and there was a massive degree of variation in the organic versus non-organic produce. It's very, very hard to say for sure that organic is simply better. In fact, in many cases it seems that non-organic might produce more nutrition than organic. So it's not that simple. Here are some examples on screen. And interestingly, the same kind of goes for pesticides as well. The amount of pesticides in the food you consume isn't universal, dependent on whether or not it's organic or non-organic. In fact, it's much more a case of the exact type of food that you're eating. For example, thick-skinned fruit or veg typically will have less pesticide residues inside the edible part of the fruit due to this thick skin. Some examples would be bananas or avocado, for example. Whereas soft fruits like berries, particularly things like strawberries or raspberries, might well collect a lot more pesticide residue. So be wary of that. It's not as simple as organic good, non-organic bad, but maybe more specific to the exact fruit and veg that you're buying. Now, I know the vast majority of you are probably here to learn about the effects for your health, and that I know I do keep on banging on about the environment and the effects on the environment, but I think it's such an important part of it. When we're evaluating a lifestyle or a diet or anything like that, we have to equate the bigger picture. We have to see how viable is this as a strategy for the world. Yeah, it's great to be as selfishly healthy as you possibly can be. That's wonderful, why not? If you can be as healthy as you can and live as long as you can, then fantastic. But like, what about your kids and everything after that? What about the future? Without sounding too preachy, and I know it does sound incredibly preachy, I do feel like this is so important when it comes to making decisions for our health. We ask ourselves the question, can the world go organic? Now, I would say very likely a resounding no. Take Sri Lanka as an example. Sri Lanka actually banned the import of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and they attempted to go completely organic. They tried to convert all of their farming over to organic crops. It was a total disaster. I would definitely advise Googling this in your own time and learning more about it. But in brief, crop yields drop dramatically because one issue with organic farming is that the actual size of fruit and veg is smaller, and you get less of it and it takes longer to grow. So the entire yield is just so much smaller overall. There were countless issues with pests and diseases, as you can imagine. Literally entire crops were lost. It was an absolute disaster. The economy massively struggled as a result, and they ended up basically doing a U-turn and reintroducing fertilizers because it really was that bad. Like, it is a big shame that we can't just live at one with nature in this idealistic way, but unfortunately, I just don't think we really live a natural life anymore. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, just by the standards that most people hold when it comes to natural, I don't think it really works like that anymore. It does sound a bit morbid and a bit hopeless, but just hear me out. The solution, I think, is that you can take action from home, because the best way of guaranteeing that your food is organic, pesticide-free, fertilizer-free, etc., is by using the own land or space you have to grow your own food. You can do it entirely organically and you don't need much space. There'll be far less waste because you're just eating what you grow. If you're blessed with more space in your garden, then just grow infinitely more food. And actually it allows you to target growing foods that are more affected by being non-organic. So things like berries or salad leaves, for example, that are incredibly easy to grow from home that might otherwise be very high in pesticides or contribute badly to the environment if they were grown in non-organic situations, which is very much the case for things like strawberries and lettuce. So to summarize that point very quickly, by growing things like salads and strawberries from home, you don't need much space at all. We are talking literally tiny amounts of space. You can grow a surprising amount of food. It tastes a million times better. You can experiment with cool varieties. You guarantee that they're organic. You guarantee that they have a very high nutrient quality to them. It really isn't that time consuming. It's actually incredibly easy. Now, I'm not the best place to go to for how to do this, but I will link a ton of accounts just here for amazing sources of information on growing your own food, etc., etc. And here is a checklist of very easy to grow, high impact, cost effective foods such as strawberries and salads that you can grow with ease, that have a very high benefit, that are nutrient dense, and that maybe they're things that you wouldn't otherwise want to consume if they were non-organic, if you are concerned about pesticides and herbicides and other chemical residues. And here's another checklist for foods that you might want to think about buying non-organic because they're effectively the same in regard to either their nutrient content or their environmental impact or their safety if you're concerned about pesticides, etc. So yes, of course you can continue to buy organic, that's great, but just know that it isn't necessarily the be-all end-all and it isn't necessarily the absolute godsend that it's made out to seem. And you might find that you'll have a better impact to both your own health and the environment as a whole when you make smarter decisions that I've outlined in this video. So a bit more of a serious video today. I know it was a bit preachy at times, my apologies, I'm passionate about these things, but you get the idea. Organic, not always better. There are way better options that you can do and things that you can action in your life right now to have a massive impact for both your health and the environment. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe, like, follow for more, and I'll see you next week.